So professional. Damn. I don't know why we look at this. Yeah, we do.
Hello, I am Rev Lusky,
I'm Rev Miller. Rev Lehman.
Rev Pretsky.
and today we will be sharing with you our deliberation of the case of Rachel Rubenstein versus Oliva Industries.
Let me remind you of the case. Rachel Rubenstein was in her self-driving car listening to her podcast when her car suddenly swerves and T-bones Mr. Shalom's car due to a pedestrian that comes into the middle of the street, a jaywalker. Mr. Shalom then sues Ms. Rubenstein for all of the damages. He asks for a lot of money, so of course Ms. Rubenstein tells him to sue the company of the car, Oliva Industries.
Ms. Rubenstein supports herself by saying they're the ones that wrote the programming that made the car swerve into Mr. Shalom's car. She says she would have just slammed on the brakes if she were driving. Eli Levine, the CEO of Oliva Industries, says the car is programmed to minimize the risk of fatalities, so the crash must have been a case where the third party's life was at risk.
The question is, who is liable to pay for the damages at play?
Our Beit Din has researched different Talmudic texts, and we will now explain the different related points that we have found. The first chapter of Bava Kama explains the 4 different Talmudic types of damages: the ox, the pit, the chewer, and the fire. Just as one must guard and repay the damages caused by their ox specific to its nature, the same must be done for the car. However, a discrepancy can be identified here between this text and the case of the car crash. In the case of the crash, it is not the car's nature to cause damage, nor is the programming of the car Rachel's responsibility. The ox does the damage accidentally based on what it knows. The car behaves the same way. However, it tries to save as many lives as possible based on its programming. It literally cannot do anything else. The damage of the self-driving car is categorized as the ox.
In Tosafot Bava Kama 27b, it states it is possible to derive from this by close reading that a person who causes damage is exempt in the case of duress. Duress meaning threats or violence or constraints against one's will or better judgment. Like the source above, the car makes its decisions in order to save as many lives as possible. Again, this is controversial because the rabbis state that a full compensation does not need to be made, meaning full compensation for Mr. Shalom's needs will not be provided. According to this case, in the case of the car crash, Rachel must only pay for the car, not the medical bills as well, or the money he is demanding for lack of time at work. While we do not believe that this is the way to go, nor do we believe that Rachel and Mr. Shalom's case fits perfectly into the structure, it is a very interesting fix as well as beneficial to both parties for the most part.
Rashi comments on Bava Kama 60b Ve'atzliya. It is forbidden to save oneself by destroying another's property. According to this text, Mr. Levine must change the programming of his car. The Gemara recognizes that it is unfair to save one person at the expense of another. We interpret this as not only is it wrong to hurt someone to save oneself, but it is also wrong to hurt another to save a third party. Up until this point, it has been unethical. Furthermore, there is no guarantee that the crash with Mr. Shalom's car would not have killed him.
We found also that in Shemot 22:5, when a fire is started and spreads to thorns so that stacked, standing, or growing grain is consumed, he who started the fire must make restitution. This pasuk refers to the idea of being responsible for an unintentional consequence of one's action. Here we see similarities between the car and the fire. How, you may ask? While the crash was unwitting, it soon became the accidental consequence of the car. According to this halachic rule, we believe Oliva Industries must make restitution.
Rabbeinu Asher teaches about the prohibition of one's right to gallop with a horse on a public road. This is because there is no guarantee that it will be able to stop, once again proving that Mr. Levine must change the programming of his company's vehicle.
So what does the Beit Din do? We, the Beit Din, believe that Mr. Shalom should sue Oliva Industries. Oliva Industries wrote the programming that allows zero human intervention, therefore rendering Oliva Industries fully liable. Ms. Rubenstein's only mistake was in being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Beit Din believes technology should be there to enhance lives and not replace it. The Beit Din agrees it would be wise to change the programming. We propose a conversation between the Beit Din and Mr. Levine to discuss whether breaking was possible and perhaps a reevaluation of the programming.
On behalf of our Beit Din, we would like to say Toda Rabah for listening to our resolution.
And I'm sorry if I missed something. It sounds like you're classifying the car as an aux while Rachel is programming it, but it's classified as a fire in terms of the responsibility for the car manufacturer?
Yeah, okay, so we believe that in terms of the aux, that Oliva Industries is fully responsible because the way the aux behaves is going off of its natural instincts, where the company is in a way giving the car its natural instincts. They're the one who are responsible for all the moves that the car is making since they program it. And then in terms of the fire, do you want to?
Just carry on.
Okay, sorry, split it up. In terms of the fire, we were saying that it's almost like irrelevant because you can't guarantee every single circumstance, and obviously the programming can't count for every single jaywalker that's going to come into case. So, do you guys want to add?
Especially in this case, you can't anticipate for anything that will be like very natural in any city scenario. There will be any jaywalker in any city or any metropolitan area you enter, especially for a car that should anticipate these. It shouldn't be getting into a crash or something as common as a jaywalker.
I'm still trying to follow your logic because you're saying assumptions, but we're stipulated that braking wouldn't have actually saved the life of the jaywalker. That was in like your further kind of clarification about the case. And I'm trying to think if I was like Eli Industry is talking about you, so there was no damage that Mr. Shalom would have not been killed, but for the evidence that he wasn't killed, I think might be argument of proof that he wouldn't be killed in terms of the calculations of force and the T-boning of the car. I'm just having a hard time kind of following the flow of logic of how, like, I'm not seeing like you're kind of, maybe explain a little bit more to me about why Oliva Industries is, I'm not seeing the logic for how the halacha says that they're the ones liable. Like, I think if you can maybe like clarify that a bit more for me. I'm not seeing the flow of your conclusion.
Well, we believe that Oliva Industries is liable because they created the programming which T-boned into the car, which would technically make it so that they had started the fire, and they would then claim responsibility for creating this program that would in turn crash into another vehicle.
But so then needing clarification is if you said that it's like an ox, so utilizing like starting the fire, that's where I'm kind of issued, because like for like when an ox kind of goes off the path, like we don't like hold God liable for the ox's damage. If the ox has like if the ox acted unusually, it's either the owner or the owner is exempt. So
actually Rachel Rubenstein could classify the car as an ox, but Oliva Industries would classify the car as a fire because they created the programming for the car.
So you're saying so the cars, okay.
We're just trying to show it from two different ways of how it could be both, and we think that taking the stronger arguments from both, that the car is not acting on its natural instincts and the fact that it's being started originally from Oliva Industries, we see it as both pointing to Oliva Industries being at fault and liable.
Okay. So you're saying for the sake of Oliva that it's fire, for the sake of Rachel it's an ox, and therefore she's exempt.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's an ox. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess there was one part of the argument where you guys sort of extrapolated that you can't save yourself, damage property to save yourself. You're taking it one step further and saying, because I don't think the car was, from what I understand from the background, the car wasn't trying to save Rachel, the car was trying to save the jaywalker. So I'm just clarifying that you guys are also taking it one step further, that you can't damage property.
To save another.
To save even another person.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, even if there's no choice involved?
what do you mean by
Like
that?
Rachel didn't have the choice. So you're saying better that the car should have been programmed to hit the jaywalker than to have hit Mr. Shalom?
Well, we saw some flaws in this in a few ways.
Okay.
One is the ethical question of what Ms. Rubenstein would have wanted to do, and she literally had no control to make that ethical decision for herself or for her car, or in fact for the jaywalker or Mr. Shalom. The other issue that we saw in it was, why did the car feel the need to swerve? We were kind of questioning the programming on if the car even knew that Mr. Shalom was there, and you don't know the stability of the person in the car. And the reason we question if Mr. Shalom would have been killed is you don't know if the person in that car could have been someone really old or fragile, and if they were hit, that could have caused them their death. And we found it very difficult to take into all of these accounts, and would it in fact have been better if the car continued on its path or just stopped? And maybe that would have caused a rear ending, but there's always the possibility that that could have caused less damage.
But I think the question was, like, how you do the basis of that you can't damage someone else's property to save someone else's life. That's the link, which I would like you to explain a bit better.
Obviously, in this case, we don't know.
No, I'm not talking about in the case, but you guys made a generalization. You said that you can't, the way you can't damage someone to save your own life, you said furthermore you can't damage someone else's property to save someone else's life.
Well, that was our reading into it, kind of.
So I'm asking you just to explain that logic.
Just to clarify, you're always supposed to value human life, but specifically, you're not supposed to damage another property because we were saying we don't know that Mr. Shalom wouldn't have been killed if he, again, was a more fragile person and had an easier death mortality rate by maybe being old or, yeah.
We don't think it's fair to assume that damaging his property would have been the better choice. Because even though you're not supposed to damage one's property and you're not supposed to kill someone, we don't think it's fair to assume that just damaging the property would have in fact been,
It's an interesting perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.